Welcome to our latest edition of CharitEpulse, our bi-weekly charity podcast. My name is Charles Mosquita, Charities Director at Quilter Cheviot Investment Management. I'm delighted to be joined by my regular musketeers, Catherine Ross-Jomji, leading charity legal beagle at Shakespeare Martineau, and James Saunders, charity partner at leading accountancy and audit firm Moore Kingston Smith. Together, we explore the latest pressing issues affecting the charity sector. Don't forget, you can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and on our various websites. We would love to have feedback, so please send us comments and questions. This week, we have a special guest, Sharon Davies, founder of the Good Place Company and former CEO of Young Enterprise, bringing over 30 years of youth, community and charity leadership dedicated to creating fairer futures through opportunity. Her journey began with a transformative early experience in youth work, which ignited her lifelong passion of empowering young people. Today, she is recognized as one of the doyens of the charity sector. Sharon, welcome.
Wow, I'll pay you later for that introduction, Charles. It's lovely.
Excellent. So, Sharon, you have just set up the Good Place Company, and I'd love to learn a bit more about what you're looking to do and achieve.
Yeah, well, just very quickly. And firstly, it is lovely to be here with three of you. It's just great to be able to spend some time with the three of you. I know three of you in all different kind of ways, and so to have you all in the same room at the same time is lovely. So Good Place Co really is been set up, I've set it up really to strengthen organisational impact by co-designing with organisations sustainable leadership support systems, particularly for small to medium charities, enabling those leaders to land, to lead and to stay well. Sustainable impact, we know, is not accidental, and so it depends on creating the organisational conditions, I think, that enables those leaders to think clearly and deliberately and to navigate, in partnership with their boards, particularly now more than ever in terms of really pressing conditions, economic conditions. And Good Place Co seeks to be that partner to listen deeply to bespoke needs of those charities, and to shape support that responds to the very real context, and bring in my lived experience of that, really.
And on that, Sharon, your lived experience, not getting into specifics of roles that you've had in the past, but I suppose of those 30 years, things you've seen, things you've experienced, I think things you've felt as well. I think, that would be fascinating, I suppose, in terms of your work now and just generally, whether you have any suggestions or pearls of wisdom about how to get the best out of the relationship between chief exec and the board of trustees. I think when that relationship works well, it's a thing of beauty. But I think at times many people do struggle with the niggles and quite, whether there are any little wins that people could consider, from your experience, and whether there are suggestions you would say to anybody about how that relationship could be improved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that always the thing I try and bring is like assuming positive intent for everyone. Everyone is there for the same reason to, make a difference, and people are committed. So that's the first thing I would say. And also being super clear about kind of responsibilities, and so those delegated responsibilities. And, one of the reasons why I believe passionately, we've set up a partnership with Charity People, which is a recruitment firm which helps leaders coming into new roles to pre-board and onboard. And part of that is just beginning to explore, what are the communication rhythms, how is support and challenge dealt with in board meetings and also out of board meetings. What's the escalation routes? So just being able to kind of design around those things is really important. But fundamentally, at the bottom of it, or the foundation, it's about trust and about relationships, really, and really seeking to invest in those relationships. And building, and culture is really important, building a culture where you feel able to, or everybody's really clear that if you can stay in relationship, you can still disagree. because fundamentally that's what's going to build a better organisation and, seek to address the needs that you're there for in service of your stakeholders.
And particularly, Sharon, that idea of culture and partnership, it's got to work with the boards and the SMT, hasn't it? I mean, there's a real driving force there. It's not always easy to manage, but you've got to work together and create that clear, strategy, haven't you, at the top level?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of like brings to, so you've got strategy, you've got values, you've obviously got the mission and vision of the organisation, and being able to create a space where you can really dig into that, have a framework you can dig into that is really important. And seeing those opportunities to have those robust conversations, and that you've not got SLTs going into board meetings feeling that this is a kind of like theatre performance and then everybody just claps and walks off. That's not what a board meeting's for. And great boards, great chief execs and chair relationships really designed for having that engagement and having that sense that people's views are valued, that there is skin in the game, that people feel heard, seen, and that they are contributing to something.
And what does that look like for you in practical terms? I mean, you're working with, in your current role, if you like, there's working with boards and SMT together. In practical terms, what can that really mean? Also based on your own experience of, being CEO at a young enterprise, how do you expect and hope and train boards and SMTs to work together?
I don't train them. I think it's really about listening to the individual context. Each organisation will bring its own set of circumstances, its own context, really. And it might, and that is really important to listen to. You might have a very, very long-standing chief executive and a new chair. Now, that dynamic will bring something very different to like a new chief executive and incoming chair. You might have very long-standing trustees. You might have a very new SLT or a first-time chief exec. So all of those dynamics will play out in a very different way. So the first thing is to really listen and not assume that there is a repeatable model there for building strategy. I think it is about creating a culture where it's okay to say that you don't know. It's okay to kind of explore, test and challenge, and all parties understand that that's about the role of the board. It's about the role of the chief exec. It's not personal. Equally, it should be accepted that the SLT and the chief exec can agree to disagree, and that there is not an inherent power dynamic that means that the chief exec or the SLT can't disagree with the
Sharon. I think one of the things I find interesting, Sharon, is the time of which it takes to get people to know each other. That sort of the chemistry element of it. And particularly with COVID, where we've gone to this sort of hybrid of meetings in person and meetings online, and where you're online, it's very difficult to develop a relationship, where in person and how important that is. And also, I'd be interested in your reflections about how people give enough time for that element of it? Because if you don't have the relationship, you can't really have robust conversations in a safe environment, or potentially that could blow up.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Charles. There's a couple of things I would say there is that, I coach quite a lot of charity chief execs, and recently I was talking to a chief exec and they basically akined their role. In the end, we were talking about it, and he felt like an international football manager, because he's got like real stars in terms of like those trustees are bringing so much knowledge and experience within their own realms. But actually for this game, for this board, they're actually going to play together in a way that they don't normally play together. And it's that chemistry, that different that the chair and the chief executive and the trustees are looking to bring. And that doesn't come straight away. If you think about the greatest teams, and even like, it's a very old group model, but, kind of Tubman's like, forming, storming, norming, you've got to allow that to happen. Otherwise, you end up with really polite conversations. You stay in forming. You don't trust the process enough to actually start to have those robust conversations because people feel unsafe to do that. And that's another reason why you have really dysfunctional teams, because you don't actually build the trust, build the relationship that enables you to have super healthy conflict whilst all still being accountable and then having those high-performing teams. So, Charles, I couldn't agree more. There is a process. I think people need to understand that there's a process, and, conflict and friction is not bad. There is healthy conflict. It's about having the meeting within the meeting, not the meeting outside of the meeting.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think as well, you've touched on it already, but we were thinking about, new chief exec, what is that process of onboarding, and then also interesting that pre-boarding process. And in my head, and as you referenced earlier as well, Sharon, about a chief exec who is new to the sector. And then I was thinking whether I'm just slipping into an easy stereotype that says if it's somebody's first time as a charity chief exec, they're going to need more support than somebody who's been a charity chief exec somewhere else and is coming into a new charity. And I suppose arguably they're new, regardless of whether they've got experience of the sector or not. And maybe if there was more investment in that onboarding, pre-boarding, getting people to meet each other and develop those relationships, maybe that's the kind of pinch point where things would flow from that better if it was done better.
I agree. 100% agree. If you think about the investment of time, resource, sometimes money that's put into recruiting, a new leader, and the trustees will put a lot of that time in. And then you get your dream candidate, you get your dream job as a chief exec, and then you've got this gap of 3 to 6 months. And during that time, all sorts of things will happen. As the outgoing chief exec is going out, you've got this kind of situation where an organisation is in transition, the chief exec who's leading their own role, you've got all of that stuff that's happening. And amongst that, I think there is a role to begin that pre-boarding, not in a way that's too heavy, but in a way that enables that transition to be supported. And I think that when you're able to pre-board, so when I'm talking about pre-board, it's about being super clear, working with the chair and the trustees and the SLT, getting input from the outgoing chief exec. What are the priorities? What are the key risks in the next 6 months? Once that handover is happening, are there risks that we need to be aware of? So that chief exec can focus on the things that matters in that induction, not come in and spend the first 3 months firefighting. So if you've got that support to enable that to happen, I think is really important. And also it can accelerate impact. I mean, there's lots of research out there that talks about, the impact of those inductions and those early months are pretty critical in terms of that, or there is a relationship between that and a chief exec's longer term performance. And so I think it is worthwhile really investing in that time.
What about onboarding of trustees in general, Sharon, and the other side, the new members to a trustee board, because that can present its own difficulties as well. Getting those, making sure everyone's at least in the same culture and on the same page, even if, as you say, there will be some, nuances, disagreements perhaps about, more detailed areas.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Joe Saxon, who I think has been a guest on your show, and he's brilliant in terms of, we need to think more about how we support trustees to onboard. And, I've been guilty of this in myself, when I've been looking, working in an organisation, looking to recruit a trustee, try and think about what's the minimum time that I could kind of we're recruiting to a trustee and we're saying, look, you only have to do these 6 meetings and that's it. But the reality is it's often so much more than that. So it's about being super realistic and leaning into the support that's already there. So the Association of Chairs, has a great membership package. It includes boards. It's not just for chairs. And it's thinking about really recognising what training's available for trustees, what support's available for that induction. And you're right, James. You might be a very experienced trustee of one organisation, but you join another one, and the culture will be completely different. And it's really hard to just play over those things.
And also, I mean, you meant that idea of meetings and how often. Actually, you might not see a trustee very often. And if it's, let's say, a 3-year rotation and someone's just come on for 3 years, you might not actually get to see them very much at all, especially, say, 6 or 4 meetings a year. It's quite difficult to muster up, good relationships with quite limited face-to-face contact, and especially these days, given a lot of these are on video anyway, you might even meet them face-to-face.
Absolutely, and I think that's why that kind of, or outside of the board meeting setting, that investment and those conversations, whether or not it's inviting trustees to come and see the work, experience the impact, meet the SLT, but also, making sure that's not a one-way street, making sure the trustee feels able to kind of access the support they need, the training that they need. And again, I think the work that the Association Shares does is great, because there's loads of resources that are there, like onboarding, trustee question templates. It's a really modest amount to join as a member. And there's just so much there, support and terms of support.
I don't think there's any shortage of education. I'm not sure trustees ever see themselves as needing to be trained, but educational programs out there. It's a matter of, again, having the time to be able to attend these things, which I suspect is the issue. I think the other thing I think would be interesting just to explore with you is just around whether you've had situations where there's a sort of being a buddying system on a trustee board. I think particularly for people who've never been trustees before, of whether you've seen that working, and also when it doesn't work.
Yeah, I've seen that work really well, particularly when you've got new trustees who've not been a trustee of a charity before, and actually looking to recruit, 2 or 3 at the same time. So you've not got one person who just feels the newest person in the room. And so you would allocate, I've seen it work really well where you have buddies or mentors, and also making sure that you've got peers, someone who's having that journey themselves at the same time. So I think that works really well. And I think, we're really serious about diversity of trustees in all senses, then, we need to think about how we recruit and think about, what might be a good way of ensuring that we are really inclusive in how we recruit and how we onboard our trustees.
Yeah, because I think that's an interesting thing, isn't it, around the recruitment of, but also not being binary that you must go a particular route, but still having that diversity of thought on the board. Sharon, one of the things I'd just like to explore a little bit further, going back a little bit around the coaching and the mentoring, only because I've had an experience as a trustee where we had a new chief executive that came in. I'm very aware that chief executives, particularly in relatively small organizations with small teams, it's quite a lonely position. So therefore, having somebody outside the organization mentoring is a really key factor, and it shouldn't be somebody from the trustees. But in this particular instance, I was a bit concerned about some of the advice that was coming from the mentor. Now, I wasn't sure whether that was the chief executive feeding information in a particular way that then led the mentor to be giving a particular slant on things that, to my mind, didn't seem to me a very sensible or practical way to approach it. If you were going out to look for a mentor, what were the sort of qualities that you'd want to see in an individual? How do you find the right person for that? Because I sort of look mentoring and coaching as the same thing.
I mean, that's the first thing I would probably just tease out, that they are quite different. So coaching and mentoring.
Okay.
So mentoring, to your point, is absolutely finding someone who has, the experience and the expertise that you're looking to develop. There's a risk with that because it's, a single point of failure in terms of you're tapping into that person's experience, and also it's a moment in time and the world is moving very, very fast. Coaching is much more about providing a space for someone to basically explore through questioning their own development, so how they might go about approaching things. And so that's providing the space for them to do that. So mentoring, the power dynamic is very different. So your mentor is mentoring, whereas in a coaching relationship, you're providing the space for that person, essentially, to unpack the issues that they want to work through, the goals that they want to. Usually it's goal-centered with coaching, the goals that they want to achieve, and your coach is there to support you to achieve those goals, and also in a way that works for you, hold you accountable to those goals. So I would say those, and mentoring and coaching, sometimes people kind of use, I see them as a bit of a motorway, really. You've got mentoring, you've got coaching, you've also got therapy there. So those three lanes, and sometimes people will veer across those lanes, but in the main, if you're going for one of them, you should, in the main, stay one of those.
Which is the fast lane, Sharon?
There is no fast lane.
I think I take your point. I personally have seen where, a mentor, frankly, has stepped on the toes of more formally a line manager. And I think that can often be a real danger. And that's, to my mind, the mentor's got to be clearly instructed as to what they're doing and what the purpose of. And frankly, that does need the instructor, if you like, that board, instructing a mentor for a CEO. Look, this is what we want from you. We don't want you to be supporting, in as much as providing, ammunition for a chief exec, for example, to quibble with decisions. It's not that role, is it? It's more about almost not quite a shoulder to cry on, but it's less formal, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. And I think that's where the mentoring contract or the coaching contract will be super clear about what it is that that relationship seeks to do. The important thing is that the person who's being mentored or coached, it's a relationship that feels confidential and safe. And ultimately, it's not someone who has any relationship to their job. So that's the reason why it's quite different. And so one of the things I would really encourage boards to do is, if possible, to, when you look at a chief exec's KPIs, incorporate time for professional development, encourage it, make them kind of really value that time, let them know that it's important that they have that external support. There's lots of pro bono support that's out there. I mean, I do basically a day of my time a fortnight is pro bono support to chief execs, because I think it's so important to have someone who is outside of that, that role of being your boss. But you're right. I'm super clear on what my responsibilities are and making sure that that person is too.
And do you think there are plenty of mentors out there? Because I suspect there are a lot of people who, I suspect I would be one of them, who thinks, well, I'm not sure I'm qualified to be a mentor. Although I suspect...
I thought you were about to say, I'm pretty sure I don't need a mentor.
Oh, I need plenty of mentors.
Sorry, Sharon.
I can tell you the motorway analogy, I'm all over the shop. I've been a nightmare.
In and out the lanes, yeah. And I love that.
But yeah, so I would encourage people to become a mentor. How do you think that they should? I mean, you've obviously got a wealth of experience, but what made you confident enough to say, actually, I'm now qualified to mentor somebody?
You see, I very rarely seek to mentor someone, and I might do that informally, but I think there are, for me, the coaching space is a really important space. It's providing that space for someone to kind of work through their own questions and goals. To your point, though, about mentoring, I think it's on the person who is seeking mentoring, or in partnership with the chair or the trustees, to be really clear on what it is, that the outcome that they're seeking. because otherwise we're in danger of, as James has just said there, ending up in something where the objectives really weren't clear from the start and you end up with this outcome that you were not anticipating. And being really clear that there is a differentiation between the line manager and the mentor, and being super clear about what it is that you're seeking mentoring for.
Yeah, because I assume a mentor really is just there as a sounding board, but somebody who's got experience to be able to help guide rather than coaching where you specifically got some goals.
So say, for instance, if you're talking about, resolving conflict, a mentor would talk about, how they've gone about that, how they've gone about it, what you might do, how I found this useful. Whereas a coach would be working through with that individual ways that they are thinking, ways in which they might go about it, and unpacking what possible outcomes might be, what the risks and benefits are. So they're just really spending time unpacking the situation and the possible responses, which kind of makes that person work in a different way because they're thinking about it. Whereas with a mentoring relationship, then clearly you will lead. I mean, they'll still, I'm sure, ask a lot of coaching questions, but they'll be presenting or sharing their own experience much more proactively.
Sharon, were there times in your career, not just as a CEO, but throughout, then that you look back and think, I really could have done with some mentoring then? Are there particular circumstances where you just feel that was clearly something that would have benefited you at the time?
100%. 100%. I think I've had this conversation with Charles where, I have always been out as gay in throughout my career, my working career. But it wasn't until probably my early 30s, late 30s, that I started to understand the relationship between class and progression. And I fundamentally believe to my core that the biggest barriers I've ever had in my career were not related to sexuality. They were related to class. And I do feel fundamentally that I could have really done with someone that was no one who I felt, I could look to and go, the person is in a chief exec relationship, chief exec position that I could ask for support for, or, working class stock at that time. And I think in some ways that's one of the reasons why I try and do as much as I can, because it's quite a lonely space. I mean, particularly, slightly off tangent, but I think class is such an underspoken about barrier, even to this day. And so, yeah, a mentor, I think, would have been really helpful for me early on in the career.
That's as much about a belief thing, isn't it? Of believing that you're good enough to do the job. And sometimes you just need somebody to turn around you and tell you that. One of the things, Sharon, I'd like to just explore with you is around shaping values and values their culture within an organization and how you go about doing that. Because, a lot of organizations will have a culture within it, and a lot of that will be set by the senior management team and by the trustees. But if you've got an issue where you want to change a culture, that's a much more difficult thing to do.
It is. And then obviously there's an age-old saying, isn't there, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it does, because, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if people don't feel safe or they don't feel able to say, I don't understand how this works, it can be potentially quite dangerous, really. So I think so if I was to work with an organization in culture, it's first of all understanding right across the organization what people feel that culture is. And sometimes there's quite a disconnect between what, the SLT feel the culture is and the rest of the organization feels the culture is, particularly in remote world. People, one of the things that is really important to me is that people feel that they belong and they matter. Fundamentally, that is one of the things that, connection is so important, isn't it? And so being able to kind of take that baseline, some people use surveys, but then again, you're assuming that people feel safe enough to feel, to say what they feel. But you would take that litmus, you'd take that that sense. Very often people will have value statements in an organization that are on, various collateral, and it's really testing that out. That's the first thing, is really testing the.
Love to see the values on the wall, Sharon, when I'm in a particularly uncomfortable board meeting, and I just think, it's literally the elephant in the room, where you think the feeling of this meeting, the behaviours at this meeting in no way, advance what you're stating your values to be. And I think sometimes that's where perhaps the values of the organisation, the board doesn't necessarily see them as part and parcel of that as well. It's almost a kind of completely separate. I think that's an interesting kind of division almost.
100%. And just that whole organisational kind of sense of culture of how we behave, how we respond to things in the toughest of moments. We know, don't we, when things go wrong, that is the snapshot of your culture. If you ever want to see a culture at play, look at when things go wrong. Look at what people do when things go wrong. If they go to blame. So it's a bit like one of my favourite moments in the World Cup when the girls won the World Cup likenesses was when they missed penalties or when they missed goals. And what they did was they went to each other in those moments. And that's what you want in a culture. In those moments, the toughest moments, you want them running walls for each other, not going whose fault is it? Because that's a culture where people feel really unsafe. And it goes back to what I was saying about, dysfunctional teams. Trust is the foundation. Then relationship gets built. Then you can have that healthy conflict. And the problem is you either get too nicer cultures where people don't feel safe enough and everything's fine and everything's wonderful. We have this toxic positivity, or you just have this conflict and it's really unhealthy and unboundaried because people say, well, I just say it how it is. That's just who I am. But ultimately, it can be quite cruel and really just not very helpful to anybody. So there's a balance there.
As a consultant, Sharon, how quickly can you spot where there is that difference between the stated values of an organisation and what they actually do in practice? Is it very often obvious, or do you have to really have a look under the bonnet sometimes?
My first questions are usually what happens when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And that will usually give you quite a good sense.
And there can often be real difference between what a senior leadership team might say, the culture, going back to culture, but also values, what they will say it is, and as you kind of alluded to earlier, what actually there is amongst the team, amongst all the employees, everything like that. Again, from a consultant's point of view, presumably there are ways that you can get beneath what the SLT or even the board is saying and what is actually going on underneath.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, approaching it from positive intent, people will normally say the culture's the culture because they really wish it was and they want it to be. That's the positive intent. And
they really want everyone to be aligned, don't they?
Absolutely.
That's all you can see, whether it's right or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And so very rarely, have I seen, truly Machiavellian behaviour. It's literally positive intent, but there's a disconnect between, and sometimes that's about the time people have. So SLT being able to have the time, and very often in a remote organisation, it's really hard to find the time to get those people together, create that safety for people to say, well, actually, that's not how I find things. And so, yeah, being able to kind of do that in a way that prepares the SLT, prepares the organisation that this is a journey and it's evolving. And it's also the language that we use as well. It's like, just removing the blame, it's evolving the culture, it's moving it forward. Because the time, we're all operating in truly, tough economic climates where resources are becoming more and more scarce. So no one does things to be unkind, rarely, because very often people just don't have time or resource.
But I think the other thing, isn't it, is this, I think it's interesting you identify around the blame game. It's having within an organisation not fearing of failure. And as things go wrong, then don't go and beat somebody up about it. And unfortunately, in the increasing regulatory environment we live, of course, that's not encouraging that sort of attitude towards, and this isn't just charities alone, this is across the whole of society.
I couldn't agree with you more. I absolutely agree, Charles. And, you know, and this ability to use failure as feedback to say, okay, this has happened. What do we learn? You know, this kind of forward looking, you know, how do we use this information to kind of help us build better? You know, that's the kind of culture you want to bring. It's this culture what you want to build. But that's really difficult when you've got, you know, an external climate that is holding people to account, and there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of fear there. So internally, we have to work really hard to build that trust and build that relationship. And, you know, culture is really about the tiniest of moments and thousands and thousands and thousands of those moments. A leader, you know, how a leader behaves. It's not in, you know, the one staff day, you know, the one day in the year. It's the thousands of moments. That's all need to be, you know, something.
I think I think the other thing that, of course, is there's a direct correlation between that and innovation and people really driving things forward. Because if you're fearing on failure, then you won't do that. I think on that note, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, James and Catherine. I think, as they say, every day is a school day. We learn something new. Thank you for listening. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or want us to cover any particular topic, please do get in touch. Do share with friends and family.